Major changes are happening with companies in the US in response to this moment. And it won't be long before your boss comes to you with this question. As a Black person, what do Black people think we can do differently here? Are you ready to respond to this? Do you know what you're going to say when that question comes up? You don't want to be talking out the side of your neck saying the first thing that comes to mind. And as the famed and fresh philosopher Will Smith once said, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. So in this episode, let's discuss how you can stay ready with insight to share so that you and your company get it right about anti-racism. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Sweeter the Juice. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm excited to have you back for another episode. Let me first just say thank you to all of you for sending me the positive feedback in response to my episode, White-Allies, and you can check that out by clicking on the link in the description box. In this episode, I discuss the strategies you can use to talk about systemic racism in your workplace. Now, where do I even begin? Well, some companies believe that because Black people experience racism, that means they magically have all the answers. And it really isn't fair that your colleagues come to you for solutions that people have literally spent their entire lives studying, researching, and writing about. Regardless, though, this moment is a golden opportunity for you to have your voice heard. So let's get right to the juice of what it takes to have what you say count. Before anything else, you have to get your mind and your motivation right. At no other time in the US have white people been so intrigued by this brand new concept introduced just last month, systemic racism. Okay, just kidding. Systemic and institutional racism was coined by Stokely and Charles Hamilton in the 1960s. So yes, Black people have been researching this, reporting on it, singing about it, screaming about it, painting about it, protesting against systemic racism constantly, not just for the past days, but for months, years, decades, centuries even. It's actually hurtful to think that white people's current interest in systemic racism basically means that they've been ignoring or discounting pretty much everything we've been saying about racism this entire time. Okay, but let's not go there. Let's look at the positive side. Better late than never, right? Now, if you want to be prepared when you are accosted at the virtual or actual office coffee pot, or when you're asked to speak on behalf of the Black community, then you have to have your thoughtful response together so you're more likely to be heard. So to the more crude question of, is our company racist? You have two routes, right? Depending on your motivation. You can say what you want to say, or you can say what will get you the results that you want. Now, what you might want to say in response to a question like that is, are you actually joking right now? Yes, this company is racist. Why else did I train you and now you're my boss? Why am I one of only a handful of Black people who works here? And why is this the first time that you've actually spoken to me in years? And by the way, my name is Elizabeth, not Monica, because Monica is the other Black lady who works here. And yes, basically, I think we should pretty much tear it all down and start over. Even if you do believe some variation of that, is that really the response that's going to get you to advance the conversation in the direction that you want? So let's try something a bit more like this. Hey, I appreciate your concern about making sure our company does not perpetuate systemic racism. What I can say is that like other companies around the US, we should evaluate all of our policies, practices, and company culture to be sure that they're all aligned with our commitment to anti-racism. All right, so see, you've disarmed your colleagues by reassuring them that it's not about them, though some of them do have some issues. Now you're poised to be able to drop some real knowledge that will move your company away from those tired, old school, and really problematic ideas about diversity and towards a model of change that acknowledges systemic racism and promotes an anti-racist action plan. Now, for decades, companies have been focused on diversity, but research shows that an alternative approach and intentional focus on anti-racism would be a much more effective route to addressing systemic racism. Okay, now slow down, because if you say all of this, your colleagues might start to feel a little bit shaky. They thought they were doing the right thing by periodically, though somewhat randomly, inserting the word diversity into their presentations and their emails, especially the ones written to Black people. And now you're telling them that diversity is not enough, when it's possible that they have not even heard the term systemic racism or anti-racism. But before you can break this down to them, you need to get it right in your own mind about why diversity is not enough. And there are a few main reasons for this. The way that diversity has been used or misused is that it often erases race and racism in exchange for focusing on disparities that make white people feel more comfortable: gender, LGBT issues, or disability. And to be clear, these issues are absolutely important. In fact, racism shapes how individuals in those groups and those categories are treated. But the point is that some companies strategically focus on other forms of oppression as a way to avoid talking about racism. The other problem is that diversity efforts can be superficial gestures, right? The photo ops, one-off training, sporadic funding opportunities, which can actually worsen racial disparities. They don't get to the root of the problem, and now critical resources that could have been spent on efforts to advance institutional change have been lost. Diversity, even when it is directed to race and racism, can often be narrowly focused only on hiring more qualified Black employees, without a concern for how racism shapes people's actual day-to-day experiences, impacts retentions, impacts views about competence, and even influences opportunities for advancement. And then finally, diversity trainings, because they're done so sporadically, are actually not very useful for addressing implicit bias in the long term. Now, if you say all of this, your colleagues' eyes may start to gloss over, but that's just because they're listening and processing what you've said. I guarantee that something you say will stick. In the end, the way to ensure that you're using your voice in the best way is to highlight solutions that address systemic racism. And because systemic racism describes how power and resources tend to be disproportionately allocated to white people, and it refers to how whiteness is the standard against which all people are judged in their interactions, all of your solutions need to be addressing these issues. Now, ordinarily, I'd like to be able to show you examples of companies that have been or have gotten it right. But the reality is that companies are still just now seeing that anti-racism is important. So we need time to see whether they'll make good on their statements. But I can tell you a little bit about what companies doing successfully have, what qualities they have. The first point is emphasized by Dr. Erin Thomas. She says that these companies have clear goals and consistent messaging about how they are invested in anti-racism beyond these acute responses in this current crisis. They have transparency, so they invest in a full racial audit to evaluate racial pay disparities, rates of promotion, employee sense of inclusion or belonging, how responsibilities are assigned, and who makes the major decisions and leads the major or high-profile initiatives. A diversity model doesn't require any of that. Secondly, anti-racist companies educate. They have mandatory and ongoing anti-racist training for employees and leaders with metrics that show whether the training is actually improving the company climate. Their strategic plans also include permanent and institutionalized initiatives to promote the ongoing recruitment, retention, and advancement of Black employees. And their initiatives are geared towards closing the gaps and redistributing power and resources. For example, in a diversity model, Gibran, a Black grad from a top business school, is appointed into an executive and high-profile position in a Fortune 500 company with a great title and a competitive salary. The company loves to brag about him as their new Black hire. But not only is Gibran the only Black hire among all of the company's managers and executives, Gibran's department is so underfunded that he has limited ability to be effective in his position. So he's paraded as a symbol of diversity rather than as someone who is given the tools to thrive and make an impact in the company. Now, companies with an anti-racist approach reject the idea that there's one Black unicorn out there who can take on challenging responsibilities. They actively seek ways to recruit and retain Black talent. And this Black talent spans all leadership areas with diverse skills and innovative ideas that will enhance the workplace. Finally, we know all too well that often efforts to engage with anti-racism are not sustained. They end up being sporadic and reactionary. But companies that are successful at institutionalizing anti-racism, they use ongoing tracking. They include an assessment of whether they meet their anti-racist goals in the same quarterly and annual reports that they use to evaluate critical performance indicators, such as net profit or even return on investment. So this not only shows where their values lie, it also allows them to track the progress of their efforts and to use accountability structures. So there you have it. You have the formula for what it takes for a company to really make good on its commitment to anti-racism. And it's not for everybody, because as you can see, anti-racism requires work, sustained, not sporadic efforts, and it takes institutional commitment. So however you respond to that question of what your company should do, make sure your answer addresses systemic racism in a way that can lead to real change. And after watching this, I hope you feel like you can stay ready to share this insight about systemic racism wherever the opportunity arises. Let me know what you think about this episode by leaving comments below. And for more resources about anti-racism and systemic racism, especially in the workplace, check out the description box. And listen, while you're at it, click on this link below to subscribe and get alerts about new episodes of Sweeter the Juice. Until next time, live the good life, live the sweet life.